House of the Dragon review is pure Game of Thrones. HBO big budget Game of Thrones prequel is a rich textured work, sharply written and handsomely directed, which is darker and more sophisticated than the original, writes Stephen Kelly. It's a remarkable twist of fate, the Game of Thrones, the biggest TV phenomenon of recent times, and perhaps the most influential show of the 20th has spent its afterlife being considered something of failure. This is not true, of course. Just take the right of desperate attempts to make the next Game of Thrones.
Textured work,
But
sharply written and handsomely directed.
But the show's final season, criticized by many for feeling rushed and truncated, does hang heavy over its first spin-off series, House of the Dragon. After all, a prequel set more than 100 years before the main story being released in the time and diminished goodwill, has a relatively tough task in overcoming cynicism and indifference. And yet, as it turns out, the best way to make the next Game of Thrones is simply to make more Game of Thrones.
Shion Brooke is pregnant, although there is no guarantee.
House of the Dragon is adapted from portions of George R. Martin 2018 book Fire and Blood, which recounts the history of the Targaryens, the blonde-haired dragon-breeding house who ruled the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros for nearly 3 centuries. As the opening text informs us, this history picks up 172 years before Daenerys Targaryen, and in the 9th year of the reign of Viserion Targaryen, Paddy Considine, a king whose line of succession is in peril. His wife Aemma Seabrook is pregnant, although there is no guarantee that she will give birth to a male heir. If she doesn't, then the Iron Throne will fall to Viserys' brother, Daemon, a will and potentially tyrannical ruler played with delicious dark panache by Matt Smith, or in a break with
About the
tradition,
injustices and indignities of being a woman under a patriarchal.
Viserys' teenage daughter Rhaenyra, initially played by Millie Alcock, whose claim is destined to be resisted because men would sooner put the realm to the torch than see a woman ascend the Iron Throne. Over the course of the 6 episodes made available to critics, it soon becomes obvious that this line forms the spin-off of the Dragon's themes and reason theory. This is a story explicitly about the injustice and indignities of being a woman under a patriarchal system, whether that means being treated like a commodity for a politically convenient marriage, being held to unequal standards in terms of desire or behavior, or being reduced down to the machinery or reproductive organs. The childbed is our battlefield. Emma tells Rhaenyra in episode 1, and this later comes to pass in a fantastical visceral sequence in which the rattle of sword against child, a scream of men in pain, are interspersed with the bloody violence of childbirth. It is not the last of such scenes either. In Westeros, pregnancy is a dangerous leap into the dark. This is a darker, more solemn, more sophisticated piece, one that lacks the broad, accessible strokes of early Game of Thrones or its vibrant, colorful characters. House of the Dragon differ from Game of Thrones in various ways, although it is rem- remarkable how much it initially looks and feels like a natural continuation of the show. It is a pleasure to be back in this world, to be transported so effortlessly through the evocative grandeur of its score, composed again by Raymond Dayawadi, and set design, to see through those long talky, small council meetings where someone will say something like, "My lords, the growing alliance among the free cities has taken to styling itself the triarchy heaven." Much, much like Game of Thrones, early days, it started out measured and relatively modest, taking time to build its characters, establish their quirks, their wants, their relationships, their conflicts. It gradually maneuvers them into position that suggests nothing but the most unavoidable bloodshed of the horizon. It's a rich texture work, sharply written, and handsomely directed, with a budget that far outstrips season 1 of the Game of Thrones. There are lavish dragon sequences from the start, for instance, while it's notable that the third episode features an enormous celebratory hunt full set of extras. In early Game of Thrones, a similar sequence consisted of a small group of characters in some woods, a book beer of George R. Martin, who originally wrote the hunt as befitting of a king. The budget is not only major difference between Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. However, showrunner Ryan Condal, a newcomer to the Game of Thrones who has a close relationship with Martin and Michael Sapochnik, the director behind some of the show's most striking episodes, we say to be inspired by Gabriel Garcia Marquez' 1967 novel 100 Years of Solitude, which tells the history of the single family across the generations. Similarly, each episode of House of the Dragon jumps forward in time a little and fierce enough for the birth of babies, of to show the passing of wars, but then in episode 6 it jumps 10 years into the future. It is here that the show begins to feel like a fantastical version of The Crow, as Rhaenyra is recast with the formidable Emma Darcy and her former friend Alicent Hightower. Initially, Emily Carrere becomes Olivia Cook, who plays a desperate, scheming queen in Martin's book Fire and Blood, which is written from the perspective of an archmaster putting down Westeros history. He writes that wars often begin in times of peace. The structure and pacing of House of the Dragon does a deft job of exploring how the coming Targaryen civil war, known in future Westeros as the Dance of the Dragons, has been generation in the making, built bit by bit by decades of petty resentments and mistakes.